Thank you, Dr. Ela. And students, you will be happy to know that I'm also an Amitian. I taught at Amity for 4 years in Amity, Noida. So I am very fond of the Amity students. And our students, I was in the B Plan program, are doing very, very well. Some of them are placed internationally. So I know that you guys are going to have a great future. So I will just start my presentation now.
Yeah, we
So
can.
all of us are now very familiar with the term quarantined. So I've titled the presentation Quarantined Indian Agriculture and the Pandemic. So like I'll be covering these points in my presentation: why agriculture is important, how it is related to architecture, planning and design, what are the impacts of the COVID and the COVID lockdown on agriculture, how previous agricultural problems have been addressed, some government solutions, and what do you think is the solution? So why is agriculture important? In terms of the employment it provides, in terms of interlinkages with architecture through building materials, for interlinkage with the city and regional development, labor, food, construction material, like what you read in city and regional development, then export, import, and related economic development, so revenue for the country. So if you look at the employment scenario, you will be surprised to know that actually agriculture still continues to provide 53% of the employment, and it's only 11% that comes under manufacturing. Even though we are transitioning into a service-based economy, but still agriculture continues to be the main employer of people in India. And nearly 700 million people of the country, that is out of 1.3 billion, rely directly or indirectly on an agricultural derived livelihood. If you look at the changes in the employment share, like from agriculture, services, manufacturing, and construction, you can see like while the agricultural share is going down from the 1993 to 2012, still most people are being, and services is increasing. Still, we continue to be a very agricultural dominated country. But the contribution of the agriculture to GDP is much lower. So there is high employment but low income. So how is agriculture and architecture related? Through construction material like urban, wood beams, windows, doors, etc. Through construction material of rural areas, thatch roof, wood. So we encounter this through our courses in building construction and materials, structures, and architectural design. So probably you guys can think about in what other ways agriculture and architecture are interrelated. So if you see in the pictures, you can see a very clear interlinkage between agriculture and architecture. Then comes agriculture and urban development. That is for you guys who are urban and regional planners. Looking at the labor, the construction sector of India is the best representation of the informal workforce, which employs around 36.12 million workers, most of which are coming from rural areas. Food and dairy products consumption. In fact, it's not the rural areas, but actually the urban areas, which have a very diversified diet and which has become even more an important consumer of the food and the dairy products coming from the agro areas. Then there are industries like agro industries like textiles, sugar, jute, handloom, silk, which are located in city and regions. Like for instance, certain cities and regions like Bombay. Bombay is known for the textile industry, which is cotton. Meerut is known for the sugar industry. So you see that a lot of these agro products, which are also a major export earner, are located in urban areas. So that is how the agriculture and urban planning are tied together. Like people, when you're going to do your regional development plans, you will be encountering these kind of issues. So if you can think about other cities where these agro industries are located and how they are contributing to the economic development of the city and the region, that would be a good question to think about when you think about agriculture. And agriculture and interior design. So fibers, fabrics, furniture. If you look at any of these things, you will see agriculture and agro products being represented in your themes, the fibers that are used. Like I guess you take some courses in which incorporate like furniture design or fabric design in your course of study. So you can start thinking on these lines. Who are these farmers and what is the structure of Indian agriculture? So here we see that we can divide farmers into three types: small, medium, and large, depending on the number of hectares that each farmer is plowing. And here we see that most of the farmers are actually small farmers. And most of the like 67%, and of Indian farmland is held by marginal farmers with holdings below 1 hectare, against less than 1% in the large holdings of 10 hectares and above. So basically, the Indian agriculture is composed of very small farmers. And a lot of the component, like a lot of the people who work on the farms are agricultural laborers. So for instance, if you look at the case of Punjab, then you will see that actually there are farm laborers coming from Bihar and many other interior regions to come and work on these farms seasonally. So 45% are cultivators, the rest 54% are actually agricultural laborers or landless laborers. And this amounts to around 14.43 crore as per census 2011. So I guess you guys, like the people who are planners, will be encountering these figures like from the census when you do your population or, like similar kind of census based planning exercises. Now looking at the exports, so anybody who's a planner would also be looking at probably, say if you're planning for Meerut or some, say even Bombay, then you will have to look at these export scenarios. Like, looking at the exports, India exported around 38 billion worth of agricultural products in 2013, making it the 7th largest agricultural exporter worldwide and the 6th largest net exporter. So if you look at the agriculture and processed foods products, this was as high as 38.49 billion US dollars. And one of our chief exports is the basmati rice. So maybe you can think about the flour mills and the polishing of the rice, and in which cities and which regions does this take place. So these products are exported to more than 100 countries, chiefly amongst the Middle East, the Southeast Asia, the SAARC countries, EU and US. So when we start thinking about COVID and agriculture and urban and regional development, we are thinking about places which are outside of India, and the commodity chain, which links the rice that is being grown in West Bengal to a city like Delhi and to, say, a country outside like the EU or the US, which is consuming basmati rice. So now let's start looking at what are the impacts of the COVID lockdown, which was started, say, a month. This has led to the lockdown and closure of public transport. Now, if you see that the migrant laborers, they are not having their own transport, so they are relying on the public transport. And if you know that many of those people could not even afford to, travel in the metro, or like many of these even. So if you go to any rural region, you will see the people traveling in those Grameen, autos and things like that, and public buses. But because of the public transport closure, there has been an exodus of laborers from big city to their home villages. However, this is the time when this is the harvesting season of the winter planted crops like wheat, lentil, pulses, oilseeds in north and central India. So we all know in north of India, in the North Indian cities, we are eating mostly wheat, and rice is of course being consumed in the southern part of the country. So this crop is very, very important for the northern part of the region. Now wholesale markets were closed, and because there was a shortage of farm laborers. Government is taking some measures like having some relief and shelter camps, which are established across the country to help these migrant laborers. But these are like short-term measures. The sale of dairy products, fish and poultry, etc., have also been hit during the lockdown period, as the uptake by the organized industry players has been affected due to shortage of workforce and transportation issues. So, like reading the newspapers, there was some interesting, stories that were coming out as to, although sometimes these stories are very preposterous as to farmers killing themselves, and I'll get to the story of farm crisis and farmer suicides a little bit later, but something similar might just be emerging, which can affect the food security of the country. Although we have contending narratives from the government that we are having good food stocks and things like that. So similarly, the lockdown, since the people were not able to take buses, they were walking back to their villages, and social distancing was not possible for these migrants. There were other issues like India's import of palm oil dropped by 58% due to the low demand, some logistical challenges, and there was in fact a 40% a decrease in the edible oil processing due to labor shortage. So basically, all this migrant laborers, like people who are like below BPL, they are unable to, if they don't participate in this kind of industry work, the industry will have a hard time, performing. So labor shortages are also being experienced in most milk processing plants, cold storage units, and warehouses. Like according to the chairperson of Amul, most milk processing plants are currently operating with half of the labor force. Many workers are not reporting for work and they have returned home because of fear of police atrocities. Fourthly, supply chains have been disrupted across the country for a range of commodities. So as we discussed earlier, that it is not just rice, but the whole commodity chain from production to the procurement and consumption that is affected. Now, there were changes in farm prices. The farm prices started coming down. So this might change over a period of time, but there was like a fall in the farm prices of a range of commodities in agriculture. But so like tomato growers in Maharashtra were reported to be receiving not even rupees 2 per kg. Grape growers were reported to be facing an aggregate loss of rupees 1,000 crore because of the crisis. Wheat prices fell down. Then prices like for vegetables, like what was selling at 15 per kg was being sold for 1 per kg. And this is news coming from some of the most authoritative sources like the MSSRF, which is the Swaminathan Foundation. Then other impacts was like in the Delhi mandis, the price of broiler chicken. And I know a lot of families, Punjabi families, are really dependent on eating chicken. This is a big thing in the North India. These prices also fell. Egg prices fell. Onion prices decreased by 50%. So this price may rise, but there are like issues like panic buying or certain supply bottlenecks. And if the price fluctuates a lot, the small and the marginal farmers will not be, the beneficiary if the price rises, but it will be maybe the middlemen or the wholesale and retail traders who will be the beneficiaries. Then agricultural markets were there were few buyers. People were unable to harvest their crops in time. So you can see how the agricultural markets are functioning, like with people having their masks on and things like that. So processed food companies ramped up the production after the lockdown as people were stocking up on packaged groceries. Modern retail, which is like an important, like your Reliance or your superstores, where there is a lot of grocery retail going on in India, only they did benefit from it. But of course, like the farmers were not benefiting. Then fishery sector, that also made a huge loss, around 28 million euros per day, and many tons of fish had to be thrown away. Now the government has certain different kind of narratives. They are saying that the farm sector will grow by 3% this year, despite the adverse conditions, and that we are the production will not really slow down. But however, there are like a lot of contending narratives about this story of what exactly will happen to agricultural produce. And so it's not only about productivity and produce, but it's also about how the produce gets to the market, who sells it, what farmers get, and who gets what. So so the question that I would like to ask the students and think about is, what may be the impacts, now that we talked about the interlinkages between the architecture, planning, and interior design, what may be the impacts of this change in farming conditions and the prices, the labor condition, the market conditions on architecture, planning, and interior design professions? So now I start talking about solutions. So this is something now maybe some of you may be already aware of. Like, how do we tackle this problem? So I want you to go back into history and think about like how at different points of time there were aggregating problems or crises, as you may call it, and how this was tackled. Because the history of our towns and cities and architecture is also tied to the history of how these problems were dealt with. So for instance, we start with the year 1950, around independence. There was a food crisis. The food crisis was because part of our breadbasket land in Punjab and Punjab state especially went to Pakistan. And so the government, the Nehru government, introduced the land reforms. And also the issue was there was skewed land ownership. So around this time, there was a food shortage, and India was importing wheat from the United States. And there was around the same time drought in the country. So the government, which was the Lal Bahadur Shastri government, they introduced this technology-led strategy for increasing agricultural production. And productivity and the technology were considered the main solutions to addressing the food crisis. This is what is called as the Green Revolution. So if you guys remember, I know that you guys were not born at that point of time, but probably a lot of us, you guys are avid readers. So probably you must have read this phrase called Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, where agriculture was placed at the same podium and given similar importance as the defense of the country. So what was Green Revolution? It was a hybrid technology which, if applied to high irrigation, pesticide and fertilizers, led to increased production of the wheat and rice. So it was not only just the technology, the government had to create a big infrastructure in terms of appropriate pricing and procurement mechanisms for purchasing these new varieties, which gave a safety net to the farmers. And India transformed into a food exporting country from a food exporting country. However, it was a certain section of farmers who gained economically from this new technology, which is farmers, rich farmers from Punjab and Haryana. So the second phase of what happened in agriculture, what problems they had. This was around 1970, and many of you planners must be aware of the term, like of the importance of inequality. Like we talk a lot about slums and informal settlements, informal workers in the case of planning. Similarly, or we talk about inequities between the region and the city. So here, this is about rural inequity. Small and marginal farmers did not benefit as much due to lack of knowledge, capital equipments, and other things that were needed for making the technology lead to higher productivity. So the government, so if you have read about, like if you've seen the movie called Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi, they talk about the Naxalite movement. And this was the time when the Naxalite movement rose. And it was said that, there will be a red revolution because the inequity between the farmers who gained from the technology and the farmers who did not gain from technology was becoming wider and wider. So this time, the Indira Gandhi government came to power, and you must have heard the term called Garibi Hatao. Then that point of time, they introduced a number of rural development programs and employment generation schemes. You must have now heard of the NREGA scheme, but there were employment generation schemes before that also. NREGA is Act. These were schemes. So the rich farmers lobby was also becoming a very powerful lobby, which kept on asking for subsidies for water, irrigation, fertilizers. And this was one of the reasons in 1990, when the Narasimha Rao government was in power, there was a balance of payment crisis, which led India to adopt economic reforms and also on the loans that they were taking from the international bodies like World Bank or International Monetary Fund. Now we move to 2005. So with the country is liberalized right now, and what is really happening to the farming sector? The Green Revolution was coming mostly in the irrigated areas. It was not so much in the rain-fed areas. But what you may not be aware of is that 65% of the area in India is under rain-fed conditions, and a lot of grain production comes from these areas. So even if the Green Revolution had gone to these places, it was not the most suitable technological intervention because there was no irrigation. These are rain-fed areas. So around 2005, the issue of farmer suicide started emerging. In Andhra Pradesh, like where the cash cropping is done in the case of cotton, in areas which are not very well irrigated, there were farmer suicides. In Kerala, the same kind of issue was happening in the plantation economy. Vidarbha in Maharashtra, which was one of the most famous cases of farmers' crisis, the weather, the credit, and the prices were affecting the yield and income of farmers simultaneously. So around that time, the government had proposed measures like higher minimum support prices and loan waivers. So the crisis abated a little bit, but it kind of continued. So if you see the picture on the right hand side, farmers continued, like farming crisis was emerging again. Now the government had announced things like doubling farmers' income, and there were new schemes like PM Kisan or Krish Kisan Rail, and a couple of new measures that the government had announced. So these were some of the things that would deal with the farm crisis, which was even in 2015, 2019. Now, in terms of COVID, now this is a new phase again that where the agriculture and the farmers are facing new challenges, and we still don't know. Like, okay, we know that 85,000 people are affected by the COVID, and people say that the Indian government has, contained it well, but there are a lot of contending narratives on that. Now we don't know how many of these people are farmers or agricultural laborers. Now government has, propounded certain measures to address this, especially for the farmers. Like the finance minister has declared 1.7 trillion package for protecting the vulnerable sections from any adverse impact of corona, and then they are also planning to give INR 2,000 through PM Kisan to as direct income support to the farmers. Then they have increased the wage rate for workers and engaged under the NREGA, which is the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Then they are also having a special scheme like Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Grain allotments have been given to registered beneficiaries. There is a new cash and food assistance program through PM CARES for migrant laborers, and makeshift housing has been provided. So there seem to be a lot of measures, but what needs to be done is a careful analysis of how these measures will impact, how these measures will benefit the farming community, like especially the agricultural laborers or the small and marginal farmers, because they are forming the backbone of the economy. Now, so the question that I want to ask you is, what do you think is the solution? Is it a vaccine? And if we have a vaccine which may be taking 18 to 24 months to prepare, and we don't know yet like which country will prepare it, it may be difficult to administer in a large country. So we can start thinking about like how similar epidemics were contained, like polio or TB. So we can think about these kind of episodes in the history of India. Then what about like management innovations? How do we manage things? Which is what like the governments are doing right now to flatten the curve. They are sequentially opening up the economy. So for you guys to think, what solutions can we think from the discipline of architecture, planning, and interior design, and how can we contribute to the understanding of this pandemic, and how what changes can we make? So for instance, architects could think about designing migrant housing. The planners could think about designing migrant friendly cities, the inclusive cities. So I'm just throwing some of these ideas to you guys to start thinking, and and with this I end my presentation, and I'm ready to take questions. So thank you.
Some questions here. The first one says, who all are the people or stakeholders who get affected by agricultural crisis?
So as I have shown that the stakeholders are actually not just the farmers, it's the people who are consuming the farming products. It's not only just the, if you look at the interlinkage between farming and the urban development, you can see maybe the textile industry is affected. A lot of the industries that are located in urban areas and which will have laborers which are coming both from rural and urban areas, those can also be affected. Because if the labor is not going to the industry, how the industry will function? So I have one question from the chat box where the person is saying that I'm using 2009, 2010 old data, which is worthless. That is really not worthless, because the census is a 10-year census. So I think the census is still to come, or it's coming in parts. So we have to look at a trend line. It's not just like you have to look at every 10 year when you're building the trend line of, say, population or economic development. So you can't say that 2020, 21, everything is worthless, because you need to look at the historical. And this is something probably you must have learned. I was teaching planning history to students, and I urge them to look at the historical paths of how say planning or city regions or populations were developing, because history gives you a very good understanding of the modernity. I know that all of us love to look at the modern blah blah whatever, but I think history is a very very important topic to study. And I guess with you guys already have a course on architectural history and architectural theory, so I think we need to cite data from all of these decades, not just like the modern data. So I think I've answered your question, Rajendra.
So there is one more question, which says, what measures have governments taken in the past to deal with agricultural crisis? Which I think you have covered a bit, but maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so like the presentation the slides that I was talking about in terms of chronology, like you can see junctures where the farming sector is very affected, because urban development doesn't start occurring till say 1980. Now 1970 to 1980, like the rise of towns are there, but agriculture is much more dominant around that period. So one is the like the food crisis, and green revolution was the solution for it. That is when we had post independence. And then the second one was when there was an Naxalite movement, rural inequity, and that is when we start having all these Garibi Hatao schemes and rural development measures. Then the third, I would say, was the farmers' suicides, and that is still it keeps on going up and on. So that is the third juncture. And that is when loan waivers or minimum support prices and these kind of things are being given by the government. Now, fourth, it will be the COVID. So people are still trying to decipher what may be the impacts. And it's still, research is still like, it's a very new area of work. So research is still going on in this area. So that's why I'm, as architecture and planning students, I am urging you to think about like what kind of measures, especially from our discipline, can really help address this crisis. Okay, so there is one question from Dhanvantri saying, what are your views on the utilization of contract farming for the agricultural sector revival? Okay, so I would say that contract farming is not that big of what my understanding is. It's not that much. Okay, it's a very important concept. It has been used, like say Pepsi or some of the like the industry players have, or ITC have introduced contract farming. It has worked also, but a very important author from IIM Ahmedabad, he does a lot of work on contract farming. It still does not really benefit the small and marginal farmers, unless and until you have like a cooperative. And this is my personal view. Negotiating with these big companies, it's difficult for the small and marginal farmers to get good prices for their produce. So I think it is an important strategy. And very recently, there is a law also which has been adopted on contract farming. So it is an important strategy, but I will not say it's the strategy, because there are like lots of new measures that are there, which are part of the doubling farming income paradigm of the Indian government. So it is an important thing. And food security is not just a question of production, it is also a question of distribution. So like the public distribution scheme, the PDS of the Indian government, and employment guarantee schemes, all of this really come as a package to address the food security of the country, which comprises of stakeholders right from the upper income level urban community to down to the the people who are working on the streets. Now, the third question here from Ritika is, does COVID need the same measures as it was taken in the time of Green Revolution? So that is something actually we don't know enough about COVID. And what we are seeing is from the newspaper reports that it seems like the labor community is being very much affected. So maybe that is an angle we should start thinking about from addressing the COVID. it's the production, like when the green revolution was on, and this is a very important question that you asked. Our problem was the food crisis. Now here, I don't think we are having like a food productivity issue. We are having more of a unemployment issue or lack of labor shortage. So yes, we can think about, I think this is a good point, we can start thinking about a certain green revolution, but the angle at which we address this problem as will be a different angle as to when we were talking about the green revolution, where productivity itself was a problem. Now here distribution will be a problem, unemployment, that will be a problem, farmers not getting the produce to the market, that will be a problem. So we need to start looking at a different kind of angle to address this issue. So I hope I've answered your question.
I have one more question from some students. They're asking, are these new high-tech techniques like aeroponic farming, hydroponic farming, should be encouraged to save the agricultural crisis?
Yeah, so definitely new techniques will be required because, like, if you heard of digital agriculture or like the way the markets are being now integrated across the country, so definitely new techniques and ways to link, like, there are WhatsApp groups also now where farmers can communicate. So definitely, I would say these new technologies will be important feature, but that doesn't mean that, because a lot of our farming community may not be that digitally savvy. So I would still say yes, these technologies are quite important. But for those who are not digitally savvy, we need to think about other measures. So, but I would agree with you that these kind of strategies would be very good too.
One more question I would like to ask Dr. Asmita, can you tell us something about the project which you are currently working on? Some of the projects actually which are kind of, because it's important for us to know what kind of international projects are happening and how they should be prepared about working on such projects.
Yeah, so the project that I'm working on is a grant by the Social Science Research Council here, which is a big grant making agency in Canada. And I lead this project. This project is administered over, like, we are in the Saskatchewan province, which is an interior province of Canada, around 2 hours away from Vancouver city. You may be more familiar with these, like Toronto and Vancouver. So we are looking at a watershed. This is one of the largest watershed, and we are like Punjab, being the breadbasket of the country. Like the way most wheat comes from Punjab, most of, like, we are a wheat growing region. We don't have many cities, but it's an important province of the country. And so, like, what we're looking at is watersheds. And in this watershed, we have both urban and rural communities. So not only rural, but also urban communities. And we are looking at how they are adapting to climate change. Canada, like even in India, India is also part of the climate change agreements. Canada is also part of the climate change agreements. So this region is very much affected by weather variability, and they have droughts and floods. So in fact, it was a very surprising finding for me, like coming from India. Like, I thought that only, like, we are looking at floods in Brahmaputra and all these rivers, but here I found that something very strange is happening, so which really intrigued me. And we are looking at how these farming communities or urban communities, municipalities have their own adaptations for like certain best management practices for adapting to climate change, and also addressing water quality issues in this watershed. And so we're investigating what they are already doing as adaptation, and as an action project, we are trying to work with different communities how to introduce new best management practices, and which can help them in addressing their agrarian issues, but also climate change issues. So we are working with the watershed group, which comprises of both these different kind of municipalities. So that is and very soon we'll be putting up our work on the website. That's like in brief what we are doing here.
Very so, there are a few more questions.
Oh my God, there are a lot of questions out here. So kindly share your.
Yeah.
So No, I'm happy that students are asking so many questions.
Thank you.
It reminds me of my time when I was teaching in Amity. So, kindly share your insights on the opportunity of medicinal plant cultivation in India by VG. Okay, so already there is quite a bit of medicinal plant cultivation in India. I'm not an expert on this, but definitely there are many institutes. There is definitely a lot of medicinal plant cultivation already going on in India, and they have support from the Indian government. So I have not investigated this extensively, so can't really say much. But yes, this is an important area of work in the Indian sector. Then, how far integrated farming is useful in Manipur state post COVID-19? Um, okay, that is a difficult question. Um, I don't understand what you mean by integrated farming. Like maybe you are talking about integrated pest management or some sort of comprehensive farming, like which is sustainable farming or something like that. So that would definitely be very important. But what would be the mechanisms that we have to think, and especially in the Northeast, because Northeast is a very different kind of land, land ownership and different kind of crop patterns that are going on in the Northeast. So it would be a very very different kind of farming as compared to the Punjab or the Haryana or even in the the southern parts of the country. So yeah, I mean, I haven't done much research in Manipur, but what I know that northeastern states have a women-headed households, and the land ownership is in the name of the women. So we have to think about a lot of factors when we are thinking about post-COVID farming. So that's what I would say. Then, should the government start more and more construction and renovation works to give employment to the daily wage laborers? Um, okay, so now how would we do that? Because if we have social distancing, and how would you really uh, like have this construction going on? Yes, we would like to give employment to the daily wage laborers, and one of the points that is being made is that they are being given more money, say in Narega, but how will we really do this construction of maybe roads or dams and whatnot under Narega scheme? That would be a question we have to think about. So this is a good point that you're making, but it needs deeper thought. And yeah. Have any more
We
questions?
have answered some questions. I think. What is your view on stimuli package given by the government? How it should be implemented?
Which package?
Stimuli package. This question from.
Yeah, that is a pretty large question. So I'm sorry, I'm going to evade this because more careful analysis would need to be made on the stimulus package. It is an important one because even the Western government is, giving packages to their agricultural people. Canada government has given a farm bailout package. So it is like the government is taking a very important step. But what we need to carefully critically think about is how this package is going to reach the lowest level of the farmer and the migrant laborers. So it is important to give the stimulus package, but who gets the money and who doesn't? I mean, government has made some very important steps in this regard, like the PM Kisan scheme, or where there's direct income transfer. So it's not that the government is not trying to reach the poorest of the poor, but really how this package would now, it's an added responsibility on the part of the government to make this money flow to the very poor section of the people.
Very important questions, but very detailed, careful investigations.
Yeah, I'm very happy that students are asking such insightful questions at 10 in the morning. So I'm very, very happy about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Asmita. It was really a very, very insightful session. And I hope all the students present here, they would have understood the importance of agriculture in their lives. And they will be more careful. At least the thought is there in their mind, will remain in the back of their minds while they take any decisions related to policies and planning while they become professionals.
Sure. So if you have any more questions, you can just tell me, and then I can give you the answers.
The question answers now. Thank you so much, Dr. Asmita. We are really fortunate to have you today, and we really enjoyed your session. And we hope to keep in touch and keep getting more insights from you about any other projects in future.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, I'm very happy to, I'm very encouraged that students are so, thinking about these critical issues, especially architecture planning students, which are affecting the economy of the country, and asking such insightful questions. So thank you, students.